What's up, y'all? I'm George Kors, and let's talk about Der Zauberberg, The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann today. Welcome. It is a special month for Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain. It is the 100th anniversary of its publication, so I wanted to do a video in honor of this novel because I think that this is a really special Bildungsroman or coming of age story, as we might say in English. What Thomas Mann is doing with this novel is really, really provocative, and it's a long one, folks. This novel clocks in at like almost 1,000 pages. It is like 980 something pages. And I think it's maybe over 1,000 with the translations that are provided at the end of the novel. At the end of my edition of the novel, there are translations from primarily from the French, and I don't know if you're reading the Woods translation of this, if it's going to have a similar format. It probably will be a situation where you are just having those glossed in French. Maybe they're italicized in the English. I can't speak to it because I read this in the original German. It is quite a long read, The Magic Mountain, but stick with me because this is very worth your while. And I think if you are in a place where you're reading a lot of coming of age stories, maybe you're reading a lot of YA coming of age stories, I think this is a great place for you to head to engage in a coming of age story or a Bildungsroman that is much more substantial and is thematically approaching the concept of coming of age from a very different perspective. And a couple of my suggested readings later on in the video are also dealing with this sort of finding oneself theme in a much more substantial manner. Not to belittle our favorite YA novels, but I do think that it is appropriate and good to expand our horizons into some more hefty literary works. And when it comes to the coming of age novel, I don't know that there is a heftier coming of age novel than The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, published 100 years ago this month. So happy birthday to Magic Mountain, and quite a novel. There's so much going on here with Hans Castorp, our protagonist. This novel is related to A Death in Venice, Der Tod in Venedig, thematically. So they are sort of thematically intertwined there. So if you have read The Death in Venice, I know that is a very popular work from Thomas Mann. One that I have on the shelf. Maybe I'll pull it off real quick. Hold on one second. So if you have Der Tod in Venedig, The Death in Venice, and you've read and enjoyed it, maybe worth your while to head over to The Magic Mountain. So published in November 1924, The Magic Mountain is a hulking novel. Like I said, almost 1,000 pages, and it has this sort of interesting chronological structure where it is told in order, which, a lot of modernism plays with time. And this novel does not necessarily play with time in that same way as we see a lot of other folks playing. Ulysses set in one day, for example, or flashback and flash forward, and sort of questioning the nature of time in that manner, and sort of saying, okay, what time is where in the novel, having that be confusing, for example. Here, our folks, our characters, Hans Castorp, arrives in a sanitarium in Switzerland to visit his cousin. And that is what this novel is about, is Castorp visiting this sanitarium. And he is going there on vacation. He is just going to say what's up to his cousin, hang out, see how he's doing, and that's about it. Take a little vacation before delving into the rest of life, and along the way, he meets all these characters, and one by one, they start introducing all of these intellectual ideas to him. This is one of the main parts of the novel, is all of these different allegorical and metaphorical characters meeting Hans Castorp and sharing their intellectual journeys with him, and sort of educating him or bringing new ideas to his mind, as it were. The other thing that's happening a lot here, in addition to these allegorical characters, is the duration of his stay. And this is why I brought up time. The duration of his stay is always changing. It is always being extended. So there is a discussion of time here and how time is meaningful to a person, and what time has in terms of the meaning to the characters. Because Hans Castorp initially says, hey, I'm just here for a little while, just visiting my cousin. And all of the other residents of the sanitarium say, oh, well, you'll stay here longer, don't worry about it. Or, I'm sure you'll extend your stay. Or, yes, we'll see you here longer. And Castorp begins to question sort of the reality of time and his own reality of time. And that is a huge through line in the novel that we'll talk about today. And there's a couple of others sort of threads here that are important. A huge one is health and illness, and what constitutes illness, what constitutes health, what constitutes being healthy, what constitutes being sick. We take these sort of questions for granted. I think especially in sort of the post-COVID era here in the United States, where we're talking a lot about our mental health, folks are generally very reassured, sort of culturally, of like, yes, I am feeling sick, I am sick. That is sort of a very reassured moment. It is not so clear for Hans Castorp, nor is it clear for many, many of the various characters in the novel, who are going through, at sometimes, not serious at all, at other times, deadly serious episodes of sickness, illness, and health in the sanitarium where they have gone to sort of recuperate. And that is a huge, huge part of what's going on here. Another part, and you say, oh my goodness, George, there's so much going on here. There really is going on, a lot going on here. Another theme that is going on here is sort of love, and Castorp's feelings of admiration for Claudia Chauchat, one of the characters here, and his feelings and how they're similar to a childhood friend of his, a male childhood friend of his. And I think I've said this a few times on the channel. Thomas Mann is one of our underexplored by authors. And in reading Magic Mountain, that sort of fluidity of bisexuality that some of us experience is really well portrayed, because we have a lot going on in terms of how Hans Castorp develops feelings for Claudia, and how they're expressed, and how that is sort of affected by his own personal history. So if it's not clear, there's a ton going on here. And one of the reasons why I'm really excited to talk about this, outside of it being its 100th anniversary, which, one last thing about the 100th anniversary of this, Der Spiegel did a 100 best books of the last 100 years, die besten Bücher aus den letzten 100 Jahren. And I did a video on that down below. It is inspired by the New York Times list, which I will also put down below. But also, it is sort of in honor of this, because it's the last chance to include it in a list like that. So it's in honor of this novel, sort of. And this novel is listed at the top. Even though it's unranked, it's listed first because it's done chronologically. So a lot going on there. So let's dig in to Magic Mountain. So let's start first off by talking about our characters. So we have just this list of characters who engage primarily in discussions with Castorp, time and time again, and a lot of the bulk of the action of this novel might sound boring to people, which is Castorp just having various discussions with people, and that might not be very compelling to you, but I want to encourage you to really give this novel a shot. And the reason is because of how ubiquitous and popular the coming-of-age story is. Not only is it extremely popular in YA, the publishing industry really, really supports the coming-of-age narrative. And a lot of literary debuts are coming-of-age narratives, contemporarily. My debut novel, Always the Wanderer, is not that, but we see a lot of my contemporaries out there, fellow novelists, who are pushed into writing a coming of age story as their debut. And I think it is really important that we think about um, the Magic Mountain, because I do think of the sort of subgenre, literarily speaking, of novels. What there is nothing that compares. There are very, very few that compare to this as a coming of age story. And I think it shows us the potential that this form has. And I know that a lot of viewers out there have probably been reading a lot of coming of age fiction. Maybe you really like that. I think you owe it to yourself, if that's the case, to give this a shot and see just really how philosophical the process of coming of age can be. That, I think, is really important here. And so Hans Castorp arrives in this sanitarium in Switzerland, and he engages all of these different characters, and they engage time and time again in these various discussions about life, philosophy, morals, ethics, history, and really what we're seeing is Castorp learning, is him sort of evolving as a person and absorbing these different ideas, accepting, rejecting, or at times not able to decide what's going on with a various idea here. Some of these allegorical characters that I mentioned earlier are very important, and I want to sort of highlight a few of them. The biggest one by far, I think, that we see time and time again here is Settembrini. Settembrini is an Italian who has arrived at the sanitarium. He's much older than Castorp, and he sort of is this embodiment of humanism, and of this sort of moral humanism that is represented here at the sanitarium. And he acts as kind of a mentor for Castorp. And I think Settembrini might be a little confounding for some of our more contemporary readers, because some of the references that Settembrini makes, especially with regard to Italian politics, can be quite obscure. And don't worry about that too much, because really at the heart of it, we're seeing this sort of humanist tradition personified in the way that Settembrini talks about the world, in the way that Settembrini talks about art and history and their interaction specifically. I think is really illuminating as just one of these through lines of philosophy in the novel. And Settembrini interacts with Hans Castorp. He also interacts with a variety. All these other characters are all staying together over this period of time at the sanitarium. And keep in mind, Castorp goes there just, I'm just going to be here for a few weeks. He's intending to only stay a short time. And then he starts engaging with these characters, and one by one, they impart new ideas on him, and at the same time, his stay is lengthened for various reasons. Now, Settembrini is only one of a few of the allegorical characters. We got to talk about his cousin, though, Joachim Ziemßen. Ziemßen, his cousin, is representative of duty and responsibility. And that is something that is sort of seen very early on as Castorp arrives out of a familial duty to come and visit his cousin and hang out with his cousin, check in with him. And then what happens later to Ziemßen is also evocative of this sense of duty and the sense of loyalty, and almost from a moral perspective of like, I owe this to my society or my family. I read that a lot with his cousin, with Joachim. And one of the sort of authors that I was reminded of in reading of Ziemßen was is Tolstoy. Tolstoy in War and Peace talks a lot about loyalty and duty to family, loyalty and duty to country. And I think Ziemßen delves into this idea. So we've got Settembrini talking about like this humanist tradition, the appreciation of the arts, the importance of the arts in our society, in our politics, and how they interact. We have Ziemßen talking about duty, what we are like, obliged to do, and what loyalties we ought to have to family, society, and otherwise. And then we have Naphtha, who is a radical. Naphtha and Peppercorn, these two characters, are are much more radical. Naphtha specifically represents a lot of this, especially at that early 20th century European radicalism that maybe we might see in something like the communist tradition in Europe, for example, or the anarchist tradition. And Naphtha and Settembrini get into it a lot. They talk back and forth about various sort of moralistic takes on governance and so on and so forth. And then we have Peppercorn, who is a bit of a foil for Castorp, who represents, I think to my mind, is a little bit more nihilistic. It represents this sort of path to annihilation and destruction. And Peppercorn's the conclusion of his narrative really feeds into that. You really get a sense that he is the sort of embodiment of this nihilism. Going back to the Russian tradition, we see a lot of that in the works of Dostoevsky, for example. And we also see in War and Peace characters very tempted by this idea of annihilation. And then finally, we also have Claudia Chauchat, who is kind of a representation of love. And I think for me, one of the really illuminating things, as I was getting through this novel, and getting used to all of these different characters, and I want to also say, a lot of the characters are demarcated by their nationality, and this is a big connecting point to them all having different philosophical things that they represent, which is that not only are they representing these different philosophies, but they are very explicitly referred to as, this person's Russian, this person's Italian, this person's German, this person's French, so on and so forth. There's Americans, Brits, and they're, this whole sort of tangled web. And you get to a certain point, probably a couple hundred pages in here. I would say by the time that probably by the time that you're in the third or fourth chapter, you get in here and you realize that all these philosophies, all these individuals represented by their nation, are sort of building this web of the pre-World War One era Europe. All of their different reactions and interrelations. One of my favorite aha moments in the novel was there's this table of Russians, and they call it in the German the bad Russian table. And it's sort of this aha moment as a reader where you begin to realize how symbolic a lot of these characters are. And I think that is one of the biggest sort of hats off moments that I have to do for Thomas Mann here as a fellow writer, is I have to say, his construction of these different characters as symbolic representations of philosophical ideas, and then the additional sort of symbolic representation of countries and their relations to each other in the pre-World War One era, just really that sort of powder keg type situation, is really provocative and really interesting. And it takes you, as Castorp is trying to grapple with all of these different ideas, these notions about art and history and politics, it really immerses you in this moment where maybe, for me, I'm not as well studied about this era of European politics and what led to that First World War. I know about it generally, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert. And to me, that was extremely immersive, and that was really good. I was really appreciative of that because Thomas Mann guided me there. And it's subtle at first because you see these first interactions when Hans Castorp arrives. He doesn't know anybody besides Siemsen, his cousin, and Siemsen and Hans Castorp have a familial duty to each other to interact. And we start understanding the sort of metaphor that's going on here. That becomes clear. And then Settembrini and the rest of the characters arrive. And this symbolism is really throughout the novel. And it is continual how we have these huge heady ideas that are unpacked in these conversations. And I find myself, as a speaker of German, I'm maybe not, reading German is difficult. Reading in general is difficult, even in my mother language, English, right? Um, there are these moments where there are these discussions, happening in front of Kostorp, where he's watching Napfta and Settembrini talk, for example, and it's so over his head, and you as the reader, it's over your head too, and that is a really nice thing, and that might seem not nice to you, but that is a nice thing because you're realizing, again, this is our coming of age story. This is Castorp trying to reckon with these big ideas. And there's a bit of an acknowledgement that a lot of these ideas are nebulous and they can be very difficult to grapple with. I think, I was looking at my few notes here, and one of the first notes I had is, what is life? This is these are sort of the questions that might be cliched questions we see in a coming of age novel or a Bildungsroman that we get into in really significant detail here, and it's cool and it's fun. It's really engaging, in my opinion. One of the other sort of philosophical things that I've been noticing a lot, that I noticed in Terra Nostra by Carlos Fuentes, um, is this idea of the medieval versus the Enlightenment. This comes up as well, quite a bit, and just how these philosophical ideas, nihilism, communism, humanism, medievalism, the Enlightenment, all of these things are deeply interconnected in European society. All of these things are deeply effective of the people. So there's just so much going on there, philosophically, and I think ultimately, I think that just being nebulous is really well done. Like I said, I got to take a hat off to Thomas Mann for that, and just say, very well done there, because in that situation, it could get heady to the point where it might dissuade the reader to continue on. And there are a lot of novels like that. But I want to encourage you to continue on here and just give yourself some grace and understand that Castorp is grappling with these too. Castorp is grappling with these difficult ideas, and he's trying to make sense of all of this, and that's a difficult task, and it's a very important lesson to learn here with Castorp. The Shauchat and his relationship with Shauchat and a representative of love, and how it reminds him of this childhood friend of his, this young man who lends him a pencil, and has this awakening, and this as this emergence of sort of psychosexual feelings of love that Hans Castorp has, it is really important. And I do think, I really have to say, the bouncing back and forth between his memories of his friend, and that person, and how he treated Castorp, and how Castorp felt about him, and how that intertwines with Shauchat's feelings and how he feels about Shauchat. That is a really evocative portrayal of bisexuality, and I think it was really, really well done. It's subtle, obviously, Thomas Mann was not out as bisexual at the time. It was a very different time, in the world, where, he kept that very privately to himself, and was not sharing that. But it is really evident how that journey is going, and those intermingled feelings. It's just really beautifully done. And I think there are those sections where you're thinking about philosophy and politics and history so much, and this person coming of age in this complicated, intertwined society that is on the brink of war, and none of these characters know that the war is going to happen, of course, but they're just at the brink, on the edge of it. And then we have these times where Castorp starts feeling for Shauchat, and he has these evocative memories of his young friend, and it is so fluid and beautiful, and I thought that was really, really well done as well. And so that's a second part here where I have to say, this is we might think, oh, Magic Mountain, that's probably dusty, but I think in terms of that sort of fluidity of sexuality, especially when it comes to the bi experience, I thought was really, really well done. And I think that this all seems really heady and complicated, and I don't want to dissuade you from reading this novel because I do think that there is a lot to glean from it, and I think that bisexuality thread is a major one in there that I think a lot of contemporary readers would really get a lot of meaning out of. And I think, overall, as Castorp's journey lengthens, we have these questions of time, um, and these comments on time as the characters are talking about their length of stay here. Some characters leave, some characters die, some characters come back. And that is not to spoil anything because there are so many different characters in this novel. Um, the length of stay at the sanitarium is this huge question of time. It is deeply complicated, and if that is something that you're interested in, this is if that's something that you like, is looking at a novel as a piece of art and saying, okay, well, what even is time here? That's something that I think is really important here. And I think it fits in with other modernist works of that era. If we think about Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, or if we think about Ulysses by James Joyce, and those novels as being, as being, let's say, focused on only one day, and that being a bit of literary experimentation here, then I think that this novel ought to be talked about in the same breath because it's taking it from a different angle, which is that Hans Castorp is almost trapped in this situation, and I think a contemporary reader might feel some horror vibes from his stay in the sanitarium, as all of these folks are continually talking about, oh yes, you'll stay longer, don't worry, or I'm sure you're sick and you just don't know it. And that intermingled sort of discussion of time and sickness and illness is really quite interesting here for me. I was really surprised going through this, the discussions of I was not necessarily surprised about the discussions of time because that's kind of the modernist's bread and butter, is sort of taking a concept like time and delving into it. Um, I was, however, really surprised by the discussions and commentary on illness, what constitutes illness, what constitutes being sick, what constitutes being healthy. The doctors in here, I think there's a reading of these doctors as characters in a horror novel almost. And they do sort of make almost like Doctor Death type jokes about some of the staff and doctors here, which is really scary because Castorp arrives healthy, and under the presumption that he's just here for vacation, and we see that situation changes as his stay is lengthened, um, and I think that journey in and of itself, how that sort of concept of what constitutes being sick or what constitutes being healthy, and how that then mixes with this whole discussion on time, that was really provocative for me. That was really interesting. And I think age is another aspect that I would apply there, which is, thinking about how old we are, what our age means in terms of our healthiness, what our age means in terms of how much time we have to heal, and, having that be sort of a physical bodily reality, and then interacting with the psychological reality, is really interesting. One of my favorite things that they do in this novel is they just lay down, every day. They just lay down, and they take some time to just be, and that is it really has almost those horror novel vibes, almost dystopian. And I think the way we thought about sanitariums when this was published 100 years ago versus the way we think about sanitariums now is sort of cliched place for a horror movie or horror novel to happen, is a lot of what's informing that contemporary reading. Castorp himself, I think this journey is almost mythological through the novel. It is almost a mythological coming of age story where it is so clear that there's so much allegory and metaphor going on here, that it almost feels like you're establishing this mythos of this young person going through here. Just how he thinks about his health, how he thinks about the time he spent here, how he thinks about his cousin's health, how he thinks about the ideas that he has, about the ideas that Settembrini has. All of this is sort of almost mythological in nature. And that's as you go on, once you get through a few hundred pages here and you sort of really get into this novel and you're experiencing and living with it, um, that I think really does it feels like really almost ethereal and mythological in that way. And there's a few sections I think that really accomplish that. First off, a lot of the sections about the mountain and being on the mountain and hiking and walking through the mountain are really like, not only is it great nature writing, but it sort of has this, forgive me, magical quality to it, as if the mountain itself is this special location removed from the normal time of society, removed from the normal considerations of society. And it's not necessarily that they're paused in place. There is that feeling that society is continuing on, that history is continuing on, but that time is different on the mountain. That time is different in the sanitarium. And that is really well done, and it's very subtle. Those first few instances where the cousins are off hiking, and they start to interact with various people, you just get sort of a sense of almost whimsy at how beautiful the mountains are. And then as time goes on, you get to sort of understand that this magical presence the mountain has as a location in life and time is really unique. So that's one way that I was thinking a lot about this as being sort of a mythological telling. The second way is the use of snow. And there is, I think, the most significant chapter for me in my reading of this. And if you've read this, I want you to let me know what chapter affected you the most. But for me, what definitely was the biggest chapter, without a doubt, was Schnee, which is in the 6th chapter. It's a subchapter in the 6th chapter. In my pagination, it starts on page 641 in my German edition here. And this, the Schneetraum, the snow dream, there are few times when you are reading when you are so taken away by what's going on here. And essentially what happens is, Castorp hunkering down in a snowstorm and having this extremely hallucinatory dream that for me is maybe it's the climax of the novel. Maybe this is for me the peak of everything that's happening here in this coming of age story. It is so lucid, and everything that's happening in this chapter is really interesting, to the point where I had to pause in my reading and sort of gather myself and think about it. And this chapter poses some of the most significant questions that are in the novel. And I'm going to read a little bit in the German here. Nein, diese Welt in ihrem bodenlosen Schweigen hatte nichts Wirkliches. Sie empfing den Besucher auf eigene Rechnung und Gefahr. Sie nahm ihn nicht eigentlich an und auf. Sie duldete sein Eindringen, seine Gegenwart auf eine nicht geheure, für nichts gut stehende Weise. Und Gefühle des still bedrohlich Elementaren, des nicht einmal feindseligen, vielmehr des gleichgültigen tödlichen Wahnes, die von ihr ausgingen. Das Kind der Zivilisation, fern und fremd der wilden Natur von Hause aus, ist ihre Größe viel zugänglicher als ihr rauer Sohn, der von Kindesbeinen auf sie angewiesen in nüchterner Vertraulichkeit mit ihr lebt. Just incredible prose in this section here. And we have these huge questions. This world, this place, Mother Nature, and the child of civilization. We're dealing with incredible stuff. And this is why I keep saying, if you like coming of age novels, you owe it to yourself to read a novel like Magic Mountain, because this is where the coming of age novel can go. This is how serious our world is in terms of these concepts. If Castorp is the child of civilization, how does he fit in? Where does he go? What is he obligated to do? What philosophies should he espouse in life? These are difficult questions, and we certainly, as readers, as individuals in our own society, make our own choices about this, whether consciously or unconsciously, every day. How our actions sort of affect our position in society, how we are, and who we are in that society. Those are things that we do regardless. And Hans Castorp is delving into these choices in a major, major way. And Schnee, Snow, that Snow Dream is like the fever pitch of the symphony of a lot of these ideas here. I know it can be heady. I know this sounds really heady, but I do think it is so worth your while. This novel has so much going on that is definitely, it's also just an interesting time capsule from that era. And I think, as you get on in this novel, one of the other major sort of threads here that I talked a little bit about earlier is, in addition to Castorp finding out who he is and having this really bizarre time of it, we have this lead up to the First World War. And this, I said this fever pitch of the symphony is happening in the Snow chapter for me. When the First World War breaks out in the novel, it's so thematically heavy that, really that it almost feels like a descent into hell, as World War One approaches, as all these societies sort of degrade to the point of war, to the point of fighting each other. And I can't, I think that there's so many different readings that could be made of this, that I think it's well worth delving into. And I think this is one of those novels that is, able to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, because I think you might take a lot of different things from this, that thematically might stick with you. If you're a history person, if you're a philosophy person, there's a ton here. If you're just a psychological, if you're interested in the psychology of the person, of the individual, I think there's a lot here. If you're interested in exploring, sexuality, I think there's a lot here. And I think you can sort of tease out those various different ways that we think about ourselves, think about being a fulfilled person, think about being a fulfilled person in society. And there's just so much to go into here. So I think, for me personally, when it comes to, the coming of age novel, this is probably, this is number one for me. This is what I'm thinking of here. And like I said, I recognize that this is a really, the coming of age novel is an extremely popular form, especially contemporarily in America. I definitely recognize that, especially with the ubiquity of YA novels. This is not YA in the slightest. So if you're interested in pushing yourself in a new direction, the Magic Mountain, I think, might be it. Let me know down in the comments, if I've persuaded you to consider reading this novel. I know that it's bulky. I know that it's huge. I know in the English, I've heard the English translation by John Woods is very good. Let me know in the comments down below if you have read this in translation and what language you've read it in, and if you liked it, because I definitely be very interested. Let's talk about some recommended reads I have based off of Magic Mountain. First one is a war novel. Stick with me. This is a war novel that is set in the Spanish Civil War, that is called Uncertain Glory, by Johan Sales. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And I think the translation here is very, very good. It's translated from the Catalan by Peter Bush. And I really loved this novel. I thought this novel was really, really interesting. And this is one of the reasons why I recommend Uncertain Glory, is because I think this novel here, in terms of it being about a person trying to find themselves in a really in a time of uproar, when it comes to, a soldier here in the Civil War trying to find out who he is, and to whom he owes loyalty, and a lot of those philosophical ideas that we reckon with every day. This definitely reminds me of Magic Mountain, and it definitely, if a war novel is more up your speed, definitely check this out, Uncertain Glory. Another one which I have recommended on the channel before is Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga. Dangarembga, I think that this and should be, one of the this should be one of the coming of age novels that we talk about most frequently contemporarily, in my opinion. Published in 1988 rather. This is a really fantastic novel, and this is another this is another instance of how the coming of age novel really can represent a lot of really complex philosophical ideas. I think that's one of the reasons why the coming of age novel is so popular, is because first off, it's really cathartic. But in a case like Nervous Conditions, where Dangarembga is able to talk about the condition of being an individual in a post-colonial society, I mean, it doesn't get much heavier and more important socially and societally than this. This is really, really excellent. I think Nervous Conditions is a masterpiece. Definitely something to pick up. I think one last thing here. I got two more recommendations actually. Then another one is a more contemporary novel, which is The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty. This, I think, also has elements of the coming of age novel, in the sense that there are individuals attempting to find themselves, young individuals attempting to find themselves in a bizarre society. And I think that one of the things that I loved about this, and actually it's actually kind of funny, is her use of Hildegard von Bingen, this sort of mystical late medieval German woman writer. I think that this reminds me of how philosophical Castorp's journey is, because the protagonist here is really delving into this mysticism of Hildegard von Bingen. So definitely, and this is really contemporary. Just recently won the National Book Award, so you definitely find this pretty easily. And then the last one I'm going to recommend is finally recently translated into the English by Damien Searles as Anniversaries, and that is Jahrestage by Uwe Johnson. I'm reading through this myself. This is part one, which I read last year. I'm in part two right now. This is a 4-part series. It's quite long. It's like 1,800 pages in the original German, and it's translated. It's not in 4 parts in the English. It's in 2 parts in the English. So a little complicated there, but this is a little bit more of an experimental novel. However, the way that Gesine Crespal, is dealing with deciding her trajectory, deciding who she is as an individual, deciding who she is as a mother, is really evocative. And Uwe Johnson also is from kind of nearby Lübeck, where Thomas Mann is. So there's a lot of inter-reference here to Thomas Mann, specifically to Buddenbrooks, but a little bit to Magic Mountain as well. So Anniversaries, or Jahrestage by Uwe Johnson, is my last recommendation. Overall, when it comes to modernism, I think that this is one of the most significant pieces of modernist literature of that era. I think, if you have read something like, if you do embrace, the experimental novel, if you've read Ulysses and you love it, or you're really a huge fan of The Waves by Virginia Woolf, for example, I think this should be up there. I think that this definitely merits a lot of our attention when it comes to the discussions that we have about modernism. And I think we need to be diligent about reading translation, diligent about understanding that these artistic movements take place in multiple countries, and understanding that context there. And this interwar period for the Germans is really complicated, And there's quite a bit of fiction that comes out of there, um, that I think is really important. And I think the Magic Mountain might be at the top of the peak for me, to use a sort of mountain metaphor. I think, overall, just what you can get from this novel. I think a lot of what draws me to fiction, what draws me to being a fiction writer personally, is this possibility of how much a novel can include. Not a lot of other art forms get to have that. And The Magic Mountain, Der Zauberberg, is one of those novels that you read, and when you get to the end of it, you're like, man, so much has gone on here that it almost defies synopsis. Um, a lot of novels are that way, and I think that this is important in that respect as a modernist piece. But overall, for me, recognizing the ubiquity of the coming of age novel right now, in how we read literature, I do think, so many more people need to be reading The Magic Mountain. A lot of that, push, to read those really cathartic coming of age novels. They feel cozy, they feel safe. You can explore those ideas really in a really complicated way. Coming of age, when it comes to, complicating that, that's what I want to do here. I want to encourage you to complicate that. And Magic Mountain and Nervous Conditions are two fantastic paths. I'm going to do a video on nervous conditions, by the way, but this, you can't go wrong with either of them. And Magic Mountain's been around 100 years now. And it definitely stands the test of time. I think especially there's also something to say about this novel as something we might refer to when we have a lot of really tenuous feelings, sort of in the EU and in the United States, and those, not only political but cultural interactions. I think that this could be something that might be pretty provocative for a lot of readers. So let me know. Are you going to read this? I really hope you do. But if you have your opinion about Magic Mountain, put it down in the comments. Let me know if you love this book. Let me know if you hate it. Let me know if you're going to read it. Let me know. I'm really excited to learn how you guys feel about it. And I want to thank everybody for your time today, spending some time learning about the Magic Mountain with me. I really appreciate it. As always, please do read my novel, Always the Wanderer. You can buy this at wherever you buy your books. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. If you want to learn about me as a writer, reader, thinker, you can head to my website, georgekors.com, or you can follow me on socials like Instagram and TikTok at GBK7288. And thank you so much for your time today. Happy 100th birthday to Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain, and have a great day, everybody.